Okay.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking Tropes. I'm Hannah.
Hello, hello, darlings. I'm David, and we're being very arch today. We're being
Oh,
very,
yes.
very dramatic, very British, and we're talking about Cruella, Disney's latest
Absolutely.
live-action adaptation of villainous protagonist. Um, this is part of a trend that a lot of people have picked up on. It's been the talk of Twitter and Tumblr and the like, and even Time to continue the alliterative sources. Uh, has commented on this persistent use of villain origin stories for marketable IP to
hmm
mine in the latest round of remakes and reboots.
Yeah. I mean, with Disney, this all started back with Maleficent, I believe, was the first of the Disney villain live action remakes, correct?
Right, and it
Yeah.
was financially successful, which
Yeah.
can't be said of all of these live action Disney reboots. And it was big enough to warrant a sequel a few years later. And, there was another film that live action adaptation of a Disney animated classic that was good enough to warrant a sequel, and that was the Glenn Close adaptation of 101 Dalmatians,
Yep.
uh, which was written and produced by John Hughes. I don't know if anybody knew that.
I did not
So
know that.
if anyone was feeling when seeing that movie as a kid, like this is a lot of Home Alone vibes, uh, you know, there's a connection there.
There you go.
But the new Cruella has not been compared to, at least Home Alone. It has been more
No.
compared to Ocean's 11 and to Devil Wears Prada.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of what it has that works, and I think there is a lot that works, it owes to the original 101 Dalmatians live action adaptation, not the
Oh,
animated
okay.
classic.
You like
Um,
Emma Stone is taking a lot of leaves out of Glenn Close's book.
and Emma Thompson as well is borrowing a lot of Glenn Close energy, and a lot of her narrative, her story is directly taken from that movie and not from the original children's book or
Right,
the
right.
original animated movie. So I
Yeah.
think that's interesting. Um, but we have a few sort of key questions that we want to answer in this discussion, because there's a lot of discourse about Cruella the movie, but we want to talk about Cruella the trend, I think, a little
Yes.
bit, because she's a
Yes.
trend setter, but she's also a trend follower, right?
Ironically, yes, she herself a trendsetter. Her movie, the most basic, trendiest thing that Disney could possibly poop out.
Right. So why don't you start? Well, let's run down what are our main questions that we're hoping to address today.
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, just like David, what is the purpose of these villagin origin stories?
Villagin, yeah.
Did
Can
I
we
say
call them
villagin?
villagins?
Did I
Can we
say
call them?
villagin?
You did. We should call them that. They're villagins. I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Put that up there with my South Park of racism or whatever. Or not
Right.
racism, whatever it was.
Whatever it was. Um, yeah, I think that's an important question, is like, why are these being made now? Why were they made at all? Where
hmm
do they come from? That sort of thing. And then I think also interesting is like, how do these films feel to watch? Like, what is the experience of watching them? Where's the pleasure, the enjoyment of this type of cinema? Is it the cruelty? Are we enjoying the cruelty, or are we enjoying seeing another side to a character that we already are familiar with? Or
hmm
what is it specifically that we're enjoying about them, because they do seem to be profitable. Joker, especially as a
Yeah,
villagin story,
for
was
sure. Village and
hugely
story.
popular.
Yeah.
And then what
Absolutely.
was the last question that we wanted to answer?
Um, you know, Do these characters get happy endings? Are they redeemed? Do they
Right.
see the
Does
same
learning the
consequences?
backstory like undo the cruelty in the other continuities? Like, do we
Right.
see them in a different light now? And does that change our view of like who gets to tell stories in the cases of actual acts of cruelty in real life? Does it change our views of justice? So these are
Mm-hmm.
all like, I think, really broad questions that we're only going to be able to sort of hint at by discussing the elements of this plot and the plots of other films like it. But I
Mm-hmm.
think we'll get somewhere, at least on
Yeah,
one of them. So let's
for
let's
sure.
let's let's dive right in. So
All
do you
right.
want to name some movies or stories that you see as kind of antecedents of Cruella?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a bunch of these. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily a new trope, even, if Disney is relatively ish new to it. It's existed for a while, mainly in, I feel like, comic spaces, and in TV spaces where you have that serialized format where it's easier to sort of like take a minute to dive into like a bad quote unquote villainous character's backstory and get a sense of their motivation. And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, and you brought up a great point, I think, that, when it happens in a serialized format like that, it's much more like added flavor and added depth. Like it's a little bit of like,
Right. It's a part of like narrative complexity
yeah,
almost, that you would have characters who are bad but who also have their own internal world that you can see if you just for an episode sort of
right,
explore things from their perspective, or for a
right.
comic or a
And
standalone.
exactly. And, usually in those formats, it's not so much meant to excuse or redeem the character, but as you said, complicate it a little bit.
Right. But I think it does often add sort of like a tragic bent to them,
Yeah.
like, they didn't ask to be this way, or,
Hmm.
something of that matter. It often involves some kind of act of physical disfigurement, to sort of explain or externalize,
Usually some
what is
extreme.
going wrong with their psychology.
Right, right. I mean, it's usually some form of extreme othering or abuse or trauma. Like trauma is always a big part of these stories.
Right. I mean,
That
it's a big part of the hero origins too, of course,
Sure.
but it has a particular bent of like, you know, this trauma is an explanation for cruel or criminal acts. Uh, you know, so I think there's something interesting about how the villains all have tragic backstories when not all of the heroes do, or,
Right.
something of that nature.
For sure, for sure. So, just to really quickly name drop a few of these backstories. Most recently we've had Joker.
Yeah.
We've got Venom. There's
Right. So
Maleficent,
like
as I
obviously a lot of these
said.
are going to be anti-heroes. So,
Right.
Venom or Punisher or other heroes of that nature who do
Hmm.
things that are bad, but we think of them. But a lot of them started out as villains in other heroes' stories. And I think that that's one of the interesting things about comics too, is in comics morality is sort of black and white for the most part. You have superheroes and supervillains, and then the introduction of these like anti-hero comics in like the 70s and 80s really like broadened it, and so now we have villains as heroes sort of, or villain heroes, and they all have villagins.
So, other shows, other examples, we've got Hannibal, which I think is definitely an extreme example. There's the show Ratched, which takes Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and sort of gives her a backstory, I guess, because we were all just dying to relate. Question mark, question mark, question mark.
Right, to
Um,
this bureaucratic element of the machine of psychiatric cruelty.
right.
We want to see why she was indoctrinated into that
Right.
specifically, and what kind of things caused her to break bad, you know?
Yes. I mean, Breaking Bad is, almost a villain origin story in and of itself.
I guess to an extent.
But
I
it's
guess
kind of,
what I was thinking of more was like stories where we already have this person as an antagonist and then
yeah,
reframing them as a protagonist.
right,
So if
right.
in in Breaking Bad, maybe if we had a sequel series about I guess Gus sort of is a feature in Better Call Saul, and we get to see
Yeah,
his origins to an extent. So maybe there's some truth to that as well.
yeah. Um, just really quick, there's Wicked, the with the Wicked Witch of the West, obviously.
Right.
And the Disney TV show Once Upon a Time, where it basically just uses a bunch of Disney properties and makes it a giant soap opera. But I believe Cruella is in that as well. I believe she
Right.
does show up at some
But I
point.
don't think that she's given as sympathetic a backstory as in this one.
Definitely not as in the movie. No, no, no. But everyone has a tragic backstory in that one.
Yeah. I think as far as Wicked goes, that's like the earliest example on this list. And it sort of comes from the author Gregory Maguire, who wanted to use a bunch of public domain villains
Mm-hmm.
and give them backstories. So he also has a book about like wicked stepsisters, and those kind of things.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that on one level we're dealing with totally free IP, and then we're dealing
Yeah.
with Disney, who has like an iron grip on the copyrights on certain literary characters
I mean, and comics too,
and
like
comics,
the
of course. Yeah.
IP there is fists of steel.
Yeah.
Um, but I think you're totally right. And I think that's the interesting thing about Disney right now too, and with this movie in particular, is that, it's set kind of now, it's set in the modern times. It's not like, yes, it's based on a novel, but like so loosely, and it's not like the novel has the cultural staying power impact that like Sleeping Beauty as a fairy tale does. Like
Sure.
many people know non-Disney versions of that, and The Little Mermaid, and Snow White, and Little Red Riding Hood, though there's not a Disney movie of that. But like these are fairy tales that exist in the collective conscious
Right.
culture. Whereas the 101's Dalmatians and Cruella specifically kind of exist in the public consciousness as much as they do because of Disney.
No, absolutely. I mean, they adapted it very early, very
Yeah.
quickly after the book was written, and sort of took on the dominant representation of the Cruella de Vil character, and then continued to do so for the next 40,
Forever.
50 years, however long
Till
it's been,
till now.
till now.
Honestly, I think it's been something like 70 years, because this came out in like the 60s, question
Yeah.
mark, 70s. But like I think it's interesting with fairy tales, because the idea of, twisted fairy tales, like that's stuff you learn about in elementary school. You do a unit on like fractured fairy tales, and like,
Right.
oh,
Yeah.
what if you read the Three Little Pigs from the wolf's perspective,
Right. There was a book like that I did read. It was written by um John Sheska
Sheska.
Shiska. I don't
Sheska, you
know.
got it right the first time.
Okay. But yeah, that was great. It was sort of told from his perspective. At the end, you find out that the wolf is like in jail as an old man, and he's just sort of like
Because he
trying to
was
tell
just
his side of the story. But it's supposed to be like he's an unreliable narrator. It's a great way to teach kids about unreliable narration early
mm-hmm.
on. That like, of course, he's going to sort of sugarcoat his side of the story, but there's no sort of indication of that in Cruella or Wicked or Maleficent. It's all sort of portrayed as like this is the real truth, the real story behind the lies of the past. And I think
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are definitely some of those fractured fairy tale books that are just like, no, no, no. But actually,
Right.
Goldilocks was the bad one the whole time, breaking into those bears' home and eating their porridge. Like
Hmm.
that jerk. The bears are
Right.
just defending their home. Um, I don't know what kind of weird politics we're getting into there. Um, but so I don't think the Disney movies or Cruella specifically are um again, they're not the first to make this villain argument or to have it from their perspective entirely and sort of validate that as the truth or right.
Right. But what the main reason why we're seeing so much of it today, I think, is because we have these villain IPs that
Mm-hmm.
are more popular than the stories that they're in. They have a profitability outside of their original narratives. The only thing that they sold 101 Dalmatians on in the first place was Cruella. But because of the way that I think our culture has shifted towards maybe like not wanting to sympathize with people who do villainous things, I'm not going to say that it's like a Tumblr thing, but like maybe it kind of is, this idea of like you don't want to sympathize with
Oh,
who do bad things.
the purity culture of it all and
Yeah, a sort of
yeah,
purity testing of even our fiction or even our fantasies of fiction. If there's
right.
like shipping discourse, that can get you know very toxic as well.
Oh yeah.
Um, but like, so we have these characters who are very profitable that people like: Cruella, Maleficent, etc. They are snazzy dressers, they're stylish, they have star quality. But you don't want to portray them as the antagonist. You want them to be the protagonist so people can relate to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why. I think that's why we're seeing these stories now. What do you think?
I just think it's money, It's like,
Well,
oh,
that's what
what?
I'm saying. It's
Right,
these
right.
are
Like,
profitable IP. You could do the same story with not Cruella, but it wouldn't sell anything.
yeah, like it's both that and like I think part of the reason that villains get popular in the first place is that they are unrestrained in a way
Mm.
that heroes are not necessarily restrained.
Yeah, I
And
totally agree with
they
this. That like as a cultural moment, what we're experiencing is even more sympathy for the devil, or the devil, than in the past. But I think it's always been there under the
Oh yeah.
surface.
I mean, so I mean there's part of that. There's also, the aesthetics of villainy are have
Mhm.
often been queer coded for a very long time in movie history. So, be gay, do crimes. The I think there's a lot of people who have always sort of gravitated towards villains because they feel outcast or misunderstood or
Right.
otherwise
So it's a
find a
sort
way
of
to relate to these villains.
it's a
And
sort of it's a shape of water principle, basically, that we're taking old genres and we're queering them, we're putting them through a more like, let's view who was seen as the bad guy, as the monster, through the lens of a social justice lens. How were they represented in a negative light for something? So Joker would be people with mental health issues.
right.
Cruella would be women in the 60s in a highly competitive capitalist field.
Mm-hmm.
The Shape of Water would be, monsters being a kind of stand in for all repressed groups.
Right. I mean, same thing for Wicked, where she herself is monstrous in some way, which you could
Well, in that one,
again.
it's more political than it is, even about sexism, because there's her oppositionally good witch, but she's the bad witch because she opposes like the
The
political
regime.
structures.
Right. Right.
Yeah, the cruelty towards talking animals, the
Mm-hmm.
hierarchies and the bad systems.
Right.
Um,
I
which is why I think
mean,
Wicked is the least egregious, most good example of this. I don't know. It's my
Okay.
favorite, maybe. I don't know if that's
I think I
critical,
think
but
I think that's fine. I mean, at least for me, I think the least egregious might be Hannibal, just because I don't think it looks to like excuse Hannibal at all. It's just like you're here for the like you're here to watch a bad guy do bad things, like
yeah, but I don't think that is necessarily like that's okay. That's we're just here to do that. It's you're taking like this almost like sexual pleasure in this guy who like eats people.
yeah,
Which I guess is fine. Like I don't want to kink shame or anything. I'm just saying like that I think is different from reframing someone who is wicked because the wizard said so in the original book. Like
right,
the things that she does that could be perceived as wicked, they're not the things that you know her for. It's more just
right.
like her flying around and
Cackling,
cackling.
right.
So if you take away some of the things that she does that are excessively cruel, like setting a man on fire, or I guess cursing somebody to wear shoes, or she can't take off the shoes. It wasn't even her fault. God damn it. You know, the Wicked Witch, even in The Wizard of Oz, I don't think is that bad a person. And
Right,
then
right.
if you reframe it as like she was opposing an unjust power structure, I think that's a lot more workable
Relatable.
than just
Yeah.
like, but I just like serial killers, like I just think they're cool and neat.
I mean, sure, but I think, if you want to write your show about a serial killer being neat and I've never watched Hannibal. I only know about
Sure.
it from friends and Tumblr.
Yeah.
So my assumption it's just about two gay dudes committing murder and etc. and maybe eating some people. I don't know. That's all I know about Hannibal.
Right. I guess I haven't watched too much of it either, only a few episodes here and there, but it just seems like as far as the fandom is concerned, it's largely like this guy is like a sexy intellectual who
Yeah.
kills and eats people, and that's
Yeah.
hot
Yeah.
because it's dark.
But I mean, like, I respect that. They're not trying to be like Hannibal is the best guy and is like totally deserving of, a Nobel Peace Prize in
Sure.
reality. He just had this tragic backstory. They're like, no, he sucks and is bad, but isn't that kind of hot? Like, I can get in for that. You're owning the villainous,
All right. All right. I think that this, I tend to be kind of overly fearful and kind of moral panicky about this sort of thing when I shouldn't be. I know that like when Joker came out, I was thinking like, do we really want to be like sympathizing with like this guy, who just is sort of going on a violent rampage? Isn't it sort of like buying into, a male power fantasy of like terrorism? um, and then I saw it, and everyone was not having that reaction. They were just kind of taking joy in the fantasy of revenge, of violent revenge for
Mm.
its own sake. And I think that's really what all of these stories are about. They're revenge narratives, all of them. Uh, and we like to see people enact vengeance of a proportional or disproportionate degree on
Is
people.
Wicked is Wicked a revenge story?
I would say, yeah. It's about a rift between two friends primarily, but it's also about
Right.
revenge on this guy who did bad stuff to her in particular, um, and to her mother in particular. But
Okay. I guess. She doesn't really get a lot of revenge though.
um, no, I guess not.
So like in that way, I don't really think it's a revenge story. It's more a tragedy and like a character deconstruction than
Right.
than being focused on revenge. And I have not really watched Hannibal, so can't super speak to how much it is or is not about revenge, but like As far as I know, not so much. Once Upon
No,
a
not
Time, on
heavily.
the other hand, Once Upon a Time is all about revenge. That is the whole purpose of that show. It's just soap opera revenge to soap opera revenge. And I would agree with you that like Maleficent and Joker are also definitely like all about revenge, and Cruella certainly is.
Right. In this case, for those of you who haven't seen the film yet, spoilers from here on out. Uh, the primary revenge narrative is between Cruella Junior, we can say, and not Cruella Senior.
The
Her
Baroness.
the Baroness von Hellman, who is really just Cruella de Vil from the original. You know,
Yeah.
she doesn't have a backstory. They don't explain why she is the way that she is, but
Yeah.
she exhibits all of the same traits as Cruella did in, 1996 or whatever.
Yeah.
She's the head of a fashion empire. She's cruel to her employees. She's dismissive. She takes credit where credit is not due. She has no use for babies.
Oh, Glenn Close, where were you? I needed you in this movie.
Right, but Emma Thompson, I think, is channeling that energy.
Yeah, but I love Emma Thompson. Did not enjoy her in this film particularly.
Oh, well,
Thought she phoned it in.
well,
Personally.
if you say so, I think she was quite charmingly cruel in the movie, just as Glenn Close was. But yeah, like she also what makes her a villain in this case is that she doesn't want to take care of her child, which they frame as her being a narcissist. But also, it was the 60s in Britain.
Right, but also
She didn't really have much of a choice in whether or not to have children.
Yeah, that's fair.
But you can call her a narcissist for murdering a baby, or you could say that she just was a baby murderer because she wanted to murder a baby.
I mean, listen, there's a lot of things you can do with a baby that you don't want besides murder. Like,
right. Well, then in fact, that is what happens, because
yes.
the Mark Strong character sort of takes her, her take care of the baby as like give it to a servant and send her off.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this one is just weird from like a feminism standpoint, because they're trying really hard to like girl boss it up, but then it's like,
no, I think ultimately because it's Disney, they end up reverting to these very traditionalist views of femininity and of good and bad
and motherhood.
In that Cruella, like by the end, learns to be like not as mean to her subordinates,
I guess,
to like to kind of not be a bitch, whereas Emma Thompson is a cold ass bitch till the end.
I mean, yes, but like in my head the whole time I'm just imagining this Cruella growing up to be like the Glenn Close Cruella from 101 Dalmatians, and just like to go from being this child who was abandoned by her mother to being like, I have no use for babies. Right. It's just like,
really work.
Like, is this really an origin story, or like,
no, it's a total retelling. It's its own thing. But it is an origin of a Cruella.
Sure.
I certainly was not expecting to learn that she was born with that hairstyle.
No, was not expecting that either.
Or that her tragic backstory is that her mother was killed by Dalmatians, and that's why she might hate them. But she doesn't end up hating them at the end. So that even though that went really viral,
exactly,
she doesn't end up hating Dalmatians at the end.
She doesn't, and she ends up like giving Dalmatian puppies, that the Dalmatians she inherited from the Baroness, to Roger and Anita, and then I guess that she's like meet cuting them, question mark,
right? But also, wouldn't that make the puppies that she gave out brother and sister?
Yes, Absolutely.
And then, I mean, I
Which
guess
is
honestly, I mean, when it comes to purebred dogs, I mean, that's not certainly not uncommon.
they're all basically brother and sister anyway.
They're literally inbred. That's literally how it's done. But
Yeah.
I guess I just didn't expect Disney to be, sort of a proponent of that.
There's a lot of things that, if this movie's about to be incorporated into any kind of larger Disney canon, because they sort of leave it open for a sequel at the end.
Yeah, I think it's more likely to get a Cruella 2 than a 101 Dalmatians sequel.
I think you're right. However, I think either way, there's a lot of weird plot holes and like character reimaginings that kind of need to get reworked to make like future installments gel, I think.
Yeah, but I mean that's never stopped them in the past, when it
Sure.
comes to like, okay, how did Maleficent 1 end such that a Maleficent 2 is possible? Obviously, you can't kill Maleficent. You have to kill the king.
Yeah.
And then you have to sort of establish this prince character who then in the sequel the plot is centered around a conflict between the fairies and his parents and their kingdom.
Meet the Fockers plus Maleficent. Love it.
I was thinking more Shrek 2, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Shrek 2 is probably more apt. But still.
Yeah.
Oi.
Should we talk a little bit more about Maleficent 1? I know that's sort of a favorite of yours in the live action Disney.
I know that I feel like this is such a hot take and it's probably a garbage take and I'm sure I'm wrong, but I really enjoyed Maleficent. I saw it in theaters when it came out back in like 2014 or whatever. And like I had a blast. I enjoyed it immensely personally.
Yeah, I don't think
does
it's a
great
bad
job.
movie. I think that the sequel is actually better in a lot of ways.
Fascinating because
it has like a really solid
entirely uninteresting to me.
It has a really solid like climax moment in that like there's a big war between the fairies and humans at the end, and it actually
that's the
plays
same
out.
That's the same thing as in
it's
the
not
first
really
one.
the same, is it though? It's really just one fairy against like a king with some like metal, where and it doesn't have this sort of big bombastic Disney climax that we've come to expect, I guess. And then I think that as a villain, the queen in Maleficent 2 is a lot stronger than the king, who's just kind of like, get out of here, Cruella. Get out of here, Maleficent. We don't care about you anymore. You need to get going. It's just kind of, he doesn't really have a particular ideology or
I agree.
Belief system. He's just kind of like a bastard,
Yeah, he's a douchebag and she's not there for it. And I am there for that.
Yeah, I guess
I think as far as revenge goes,
mm-hmm.
I am really on board for the Maleficent revenge. Because at least to me, trigger warning for sexual assault, like that is the point of the movie, is that basically she is raped by this king and has her wings stolen, a part of her taken, and it's like a journey of her healing from that, regaining a sense of self and power, and then eventually taking her revenge. And I liked the revenge part as well. I liked all of it.
Right. I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, you would expect in a villagin story that the villain, the antagonist of that story would be as fleshed out and complex as this villain getting a new origin, but usually they're not. In fact, they just sort of taken the villain and then replaced them with an even worse villain, or someone who's even more pure evil from birth.
Right.
It's not about necessarily providing explanations for all villainous acts, but sort of saying certain villainous acts are forgivable or can be ignored in favor of like the
Other villainous
complexities
acts.
of some characters.
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, at least for me, I saw Maleficent more as like kind of a wicked move where, you know, we've only ever heard the story from this bastard king's side.
Right.
And, you know, now we're getting her side of the story. And she's like, no, this asshole did these things to me.
Right. They
And
say that explicitly in the narration. It's
yeah.
from the perspective of a future Aurora, the Sleeping Beauty character.
Mm-hmm.
And you find that out at the only at the end that like this is the true story because it's from her perspective and she's a reliable narrator, whereas the Disney chorus was an unreliable narrator because they judged based on appearance, I
Right.
suppose.
Right. Right.
um But I just thought Maleficent 1 was a little confused because of like the sequences with the fairy aunts or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, what was their role? How do they fit into this political struggle of like settlements on fairy land and whatnot? Like,
A little
I don't
too
know.
Israel Palestine.
Right. Well, I mean, there's clearly like an imperialist narrative
Yeah.
to it on some level, which makes sense for medieval Europe. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but like I just don't know what the Moors represent anymore once you have these like fairy representatives who the king trusts enough to watch his daughter for 16 years.
Right.
It's a little confusing, and I just think there's other like weird elements to Maleficent, but that's not really the point. It's
Mm-hmm.
a sort of a tangent.
Yeah, but like again, that's revenge I like to see. And I think, at least for me, the villain of the king, while he's not particularly well fleshed out, you know, he's evil not because he's evil, it's because he's overly ambitious and cowardly, you know, and kind of like a
Sure, but I
douche.
mean, like, could you imagine like you know, a film called King Aurora? I don't know his name, King guy, and then this is his villain origin story, and it's like from his perspective, he was thinking, if I don't cut the wings off of this fairy, they're going to come and kill her. This is
Mm-hmm.
a hunt from everybody. But if I say that she's dead and she's only got her wings cut off, then
Then
that's
she's
fine.
not
And
dead.
anyways, once I'm king, she can just reattach her wings because they do that. They can just kind of fly back to you.
Right.
And then she survived where she otherwise would have died. I'm not saying that his actions were justified because they weren't in this movie, but
Yeah.
if you can make the kind of changes that you can make to Cruella, why can't you make
Mm-hmm.
those same, or to Maleficent's story where
Yeah.
no, she didn't place this curse on her and then, fight tooth and nail to keep it going. She fought to break the curse,
Right, right.
then why can't you change the king's story? I don't know.
Oh, fair enough. Again, I think it's like he's not a compelling enough villain. He has no gravitas, there's no
Right.
majesty to him,
It's
whereas
not
or camp.
arch
Right, there's
or camp.
nothing arch. Yeah. Whereas Cruella is definitely arch and camp and over the top and
Right. And I think, this speaks to one of the other questions that we had, which is like, what is the pleasure of watching these movies? And I think it's the camp, it's the arch, it's the just talking like no human has ever talked in real life, in just like villain speak.
Yes.
I always think of Dee Reynolds from It's Always Sunny when she's trying to be arch. I know that's a reference you don't get, Hannah, but that's okay.
I mean, I've watched It's Always Sunny.
But this is a particular episode where she's
Okay.
being arch,
Okay.
and it's funny. Um but yeah, so like are we getting that same pleasure from 101 Dalmatians where she is indeed killing puppies for a coat, or trying to anyway?
So I mean, at least for me, these were some of the issues that I had with the Cruella movie.
Mhm.
I did not enjoy Emma Thompson's Baroness. I thought she was like somewhere between Meryl Streep in Devil Wears Prada and Glenn Close as Cruella in
Well, I think
101
that's what she was
Dalmatians.
going for. She
I
was
think
going for a
it's
little more toned down because it's not
right,
the 90s anymore.
but like, but that's not what this like this is not the movie to tone it down,
I
you
think you're
know?
absolutely right. Yeah.
Tone it up.
I think
Like
that the whole movie Cruella suffers from a kind of Disney smoothness, which,
mm,
has characterized all of their adaptations, a kind of dulling of the edges to make everything just kind of go down smooth.
like there's a soft filter sort of over
Yeah,
over
like
everything.
it's like, okay, we have our first gay character in the
In
form
every
of
fucking movie.
this David Bowie looking shop owner
Yeah.
who sells dresses. And it's like, he's so non-threatening. Like, I can imagine so many Christian moms being totally okay with this character and
Right.
of it.
He's not even really gay on screen.
Right. Or like the thieves, they're so like perfectly like coutoured, like this is what a thief in the 60s would look like ish,
Right.
but like, snazzed out. Like they've got nice looking thieving
Yeah.
clothes.
But like I think that's fine. It's the movies. Like, you
Oh,
know.
I'm just saying an overall smoothness, which I think speaks to your characterization of Thompson, but I
Sure. No, I think you're right. But yeah, so I just don't find her villain particularly compelling, especially when she is basically just Cruella Senior, as you said, and like we already have Cruella. Like we know this character already. So like if you want to be like interesting and compelling, you really got to go the extra mile, and I don't feel like the character does that. And I don't think it's all Emma Thompson's fault. I think, the script doesn't particularly give her anything super interesting or like exciting to do or be.
No, she's just kind of generally like a shitty
she's
boss,
she's a
which is
shitty boss, and like she's like, ugh, being a feminist in the 60s is so hard, and being a feminist means that I have to just like fuck over everyone else, hashtag girl boss,
right.
like it's
But I think it's
very
interesting that her
that.
backstory is closer to Cruella de Vil's backstory in the book and the original
Yeah.
animated
Yeah.
film, where she's married to a furrier. She likes furs.
Yeah.
I think she does wear some fur in the film. I actually can't remember now, because I know Cruella does not wear fur,
She does
and
not
she
do
specifically
anything.
mocks the idea that she would ever wear fur, which is so funny to me because it was such a normal practice in that time.
Yeah.
It's like almost anachronistic that she wouldn't like fur in some
Right.
way. At
Right.
least like mink or stoat, like something
Right.
that's like, it's not an animal that you would keep as a pet. It's a mink or a
Right.
stoat. Like, if
I
she's not
mean,
a
because
vegetarian, why does
okay,
she care about furs?
exactly. Like I literally looked at, went back and watched the animated feature, and when Cruella first sort of like blusters into the apartment, she's just like, "Oh, do you like my furs?" And Anita is like, "Yeah, it's actually really beautiful. I love it." So it's not like Disney was trying to be like, wearing fur is wrong. They were just being like, wouldn't it be fucked up if someone killed your pet? Like
Right.
that's
Well, and that's what the book's
that's the
about as
vibe.
well. It's like, it's the,
Exactly.
but it is about like the inherent cruelty, I guess, of women who desire, furs and desire fashion above all else. Like,
Right.
it's definitely villainizing a type of femininity, even though it
Mm-hmm.
was, written by a woman. I can see that they're trying to get around the idea of like furs being more cruel than other things. Maybe, I don't know.
What
I'm losing
Disney
track of my
is?
point. That Disney now is like trying to
It's
establish
that
that Cruella can still be cruel even if she's not doing bad to
it's
get furs.
it's totally a money thing. Like I think there was some like internal memo or something that was leaked or released where basically it was like, Cruella will not do anything to harm an animal in this movie. Um
Right.
and it's
Just because people don't want to see harmed animals
exactly.
in a kids movie.
Exactly. And
even like the retroactive like of wearing a mink coat or something,
right.
like that maybe she didn't personally stab each mink in the heart with a, you know, pair of scissors, but she's wearing a mink coat. Is that
Right.
is that too cruel for a villain or an anti-hero?
No, but Disney would say, but we're making her the hero, so she can't do that, you know? She can
Right.
only just
So
say snarky things and,
right.
yell at her coworkers.
Right. And the fact that the Baroness is a fashion, you know, maven. What is the right word? Uh,
Fashionista? I don't
a
know.
fashionista, and that she runs a you know, high couture company.
Mm-hmm.
That's taken from Glenn Close in the 90s,
Yeah.
because Cruella originally, like, she just wanted a coat,
She
and she
was
wanted
just
to sell maybe a couple furs for money, but you know, she just wanted a coat.
Yeah, she was just an insane rich lady who was
Yeah,
like, I'm entitled to your puppies, give them to me.
right.
And, now that's been reworked into a capitalist framework where it's like, of course, no one would just like do that. They would do it for money. Duh.
Right. I mean, there's kind of like an implication that she's going to make more coats and possibly sell some of the furs in the original, but
But
it's like
not
it's not
so
made totally
much.
clear, because the whole point is just that she's rich, she feels entitled, she
Yeah.
belittles, you know, the her friend's, you know, choice to become a housewife and her choice to settle down, and you know, her, you know, just belittles their income in general, like that you would
Yeah.
marry a songwriter. Oh, that's
Huh.
not a real career.
An
um
American to boot.
Whereas I married a baroness or a
A
baron.
baron.
i married a I
she
married a
married
baron.
she married a baroness. That would be some real girl boss energy.
Right, of course. Whereas in this version, in Cruella, she has to sort of start from the bottom, you know, even though and then she still inherits something from being the child of a rich baroness, in that
Right.
she inherits like generational evil. Like she has to fight the demons within herself because
Right.
she inherited them from her mother,
Like
even though she wasn't raised by her in any way.
that's the other weird part of this movie is it like I feel like it's edging onto like, oh, Cruella's got split personality, There's Estella who's
Yeah,
nice, and then there's Cruella who's
right. There's
mean.
Arthur and there's Joker.
Right, exactly. And then there's like this continued demonization of, mental health issues and people who
Right.
have
You can read it
dissociative
that way, or
identity
you can just
disorder.
read it as like, no, she's just, you know, it's a nature versus nurture thing, and it's about how
But I think that's
you
part
can
of it.
take the Cruella out of the mansion, out of the Baron, or out of the Hellman estate, but you can't take the Hellman estate out of the Cruella.
You can take the double hockey sticks out
Yeah.
of her name or not. I don't know. I've lost the plot. Um, Regardless. Oh God. So I mean, how do these films feel, David? That was one of our questions. Is it refreshing?
Yeah, I think like when it comes to like the punk aesthetic of Cruella, I think that's fun to watch her upset the establishment and sort of
Right.
graffiti all over high fashion in that time. I think the scene where she makes the moth coat or the
Yeah.
moth dress, everyone
Yeah.
knows the scene if they've seen the film. I
Mm-hmm.
think the moth dress is fire. I think it's hot. I think it's fantastic.
I do
Um,
have to say I like her Hunger Games moment when she
right.
crashes the ball too and lights
Right.
her white dress on fire.
It's like, yeah, it's a power fantasy of just showing everyone up with just how glamorous you are and how forward
Mm-hmm.
thinking you are and how much you just shatter the establishment with
Yeah.
just your look, not even with anything that you're trying to accomplish or your
But
goals.
also that, you know, you can use aesthetics to elicit this kind of reaction from people, and that
Right.
you can dream these aesthetics up to begin with. You know,
Right.
like the moth dress scene kind of leads her to basically invent the 80s
Right.
and like 80s fashion, question mark?
Right. She invents punk on a
Yeah, yeah.
whim
On a whim. As a lark.
as a child even.
Okay, so, you know, there's pleasure in that radicalness. And as we sort of said earlier, I think that freedom from restriction that you know, villains and anti-heroes get to revel in, whereas, you know, we sort of look to heroes to be a little bit more morally righteous and toe that line a little bit closer, usually a little bit more serious in certain ways.
Yeah, but I think
um
more and more like our heroes and our anti-heroes, like it doesn't really matter. They're both tearing at some kind of establishment. We have a real case of anti-authority, anti-bourgeois, anti you know,
but for all
ruling class sentiment.
anti-bouge Cruella seems to espouse, you know, it ends up with just her being the bougie one. You know,
Right.
she's
Well, I think
like,
that also speaks to what we like these days. I mean, what is, Tony Stark or even Captain America more than like somebody who just sort of tells off the bigwigs in charge and then embodies all of the exact same principles, capitalism and jingoism that
mm,
they're supposedly confronting.
yeah, yeah. I think that's valid. Um, so like you would, but does Joker fall into that same trap? You know, is my question.
Does Joker? Well, because Joker is sort of written to be, so violent and so like directionless and just angst driven that, as much as you can try and read like a political narrative into the movie as a whole, you can't read it into him as a character. He
Mm-hmm.
specifically opposes that, like textually. He says, I'm not trying to make a political statement. I just like killing people because it's funny, like
Right.
that. But I think there's a joy in that too, in the sort of like, I don't have to justify myself to you by being like politically correct. i can just
Sure.
I can just kill Robert De Niro live on
Listen,
television for
Hannibal
fun.
doesn't have to be good. He just has to be sexy. You know, like I think it's the same vibe.
Right. And, Joker doesn't have to be good. He just has to be nominated for an Oscar.
Oh my goodness. Would you say that like this ending for Cruella is like a happy ending?
I think it has to be, right? I mean, she is fully redeemed. Her traumas are resolved in that she has now taken possession of the weapon that killed her mother, the Dalmatians, and the
Mm-hmm.
whistle. And she has taken the killer of her mother and put her in jail without stooping to her level by not
Mm-hmm.
killing. That's her, moral victory.
Right.
And she's also been victorious in reclaiming her birthright, which is a big part of a lot of these as well. Joker had a sort of potential birthright from the Wayne family, in his ambiguous parentage. And, in this case, yeah, also a sort of inheritance that was owed to her from the
Right.
Baroness.
Yeah.
So it has to be a happy ending, right? And so, like, are we saying that she wouldn't have deserved that same ending in the original story, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Where she ascends from the poor house to the rich house.
Right.
But then once she's in the rich house, can she be the villain to someone else's story? Can she be the Baroness to someone else?
Right.
Also trying to scrape their way to the top. I don't know.
I mean, if we're doing a direct canon line from this Cruella to Glenn
Right.
Close,
Which
then
again we can't.
yes.
But it's what does the Baroness say? She says something like, human beings are obstacles. If you let
Yeah.
an obstacle get in your way, then you're doomed to fail. It's the
Hmm.
nature of capitalism that she should act the way that the Baroness acted, but that's
Right.
inherently going to invite the vengeance of someone else.
Hmm.
You know.
Specifically, 101 Dalmatians.
Right, and they're gonna dunk her in molasses or something.
Yeah.
That's such a good movie. I kind of encourage people to go check out 101 Dalmatians again. It's kind of delightful.
It's definitely a delightful nostalgia kick. I will agree with you there. And
I
and
didn't watch
like
it growing up, but
really,
well, it came out the year after I was born, and my parents did not get it on VHS. So
I mean, I just remember Disney Channel playing it a lot. Like it was always on Disney
right.
Channel, you know.
I feel like I saw more 102 Dalmatians.
Oh,
Which is
okay.
the one where she gets sent to prison, but then she gets reformed through Pavlovian conditioning so that she can, escape her cruelness, which is a burden to her, that she
Hmm.
is compelled through instinct to be cruel to animals.
Yeah.
But then they cure her, but you can never really cure her because people at their core can't really change, is sort of the
Yeah.
like moral of the movie.
Right.
uh in the end they just kind of do the same plot of 101 Dalmatians again, and she snaps and then goes to kill more puppies.
Oh my God. I mean,
So yeah.
it's just like it's interesting to me that they're trying to add nuance sort of to a character who is literally black and white. Like, that has always been her color theme scheme. And
Right, I mean,
she
she says that
desires,
she's born bad, a little bit mad, right?
yeah.
But also her origin is founded by girl power, like I am woman, hear me roar kind of thing.
Ugh.
So it's this inherent contradiction that we want to see the 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 living embodiment of cruelty go be cruel, but not too cruel. We want to see them born cruel, but also how they became cruel. We
Yeah.
there's all these contradictions in the Cruella movie, and I don't think we can
Yeah.
ever really resolve them.
No, it's a mess. But like it's not the worst mess, you know?
No,
Like
it's enjoyable. It's
yeah.
it's clean and it's smooth, and it's different from doing Lion King but with more realistic fur textures,
Right,
or
right.
doing Aladdin but with
Will
none of the
Smith.
good musical numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's very interesting. Like I think there's enough comedy in it and at least semi likable characters in it that, if you're a kid right now watching this, I could see myself having enjoyed it,
Yeah, I
and
mean, as far as like the performances go, even if you don't love Emma Thompson, which I think she did a fine job, I think Paul Walter Hauser as Horace did fantastic.
he did
I think
great.
I think Joel Fry as Jasper is pretty good, maybe not as good as Jasper in the '96 version, which was of course Hugh Laurie.
Yeah.
But still very, very, very good performances all
I
around.
mean, I will say the weird romance between Cruella and Horace is weird.
Jasper,
Or
yeah.
Jasper, sorry. It's weird.
But yeah, I think it's weird. I think it doesn't go anywhere. Would have cut it, but
Yeah.
even if you cut it, it's still there in the subtext because that's how they were directed. So,
Yep.
what are you gonna do? CGI puppies, better than in the '96 version.
Yeah, not great though.
Yeah, we didn't mention that Cruella has a dog.
Oh, yeah. Cruella has a dog, and then Horace also has a dog named
Right.
Wink.
I mean, they had a cat in the original animated and in the book,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's a little on the nose of saying we're going to redeem this character in the retelling by saying, Okay, well,
She
she
doesn't
also has a dog
hate
that she loves
dogs.
more than anything.
She just loves dogs. Her mom dies, and her only friend is her dog
Right.
now. And then she commits crimes with the dog. But really, she
Exactly.
just wants to be a fashion intern. But then her mean boss turns out to be the bitch who killed her mom.
But I
Ah,
mean, you say it
shucks.
sarcastically, but like, can that work as a sort of this is the real story? Now you're hearing it from my perspective, kind of thing.
I don't think so. I think it's a just really different story.
Like when they say that, like, oh, the story that went out publicly was that she turned the Dalmatians into a coat, but in reality, she didn't. It was just faux fur, you know, like.
But like, why are you kidnapping the puppies then? Unless here's the thing, you need to make Anita and Roger villains in that case. They need to be abusing these puppies or something, or like trying to turn them into a puppy mill or something like that, you know? Like
All right,
that's
all right.
that's the only way it's like, oh, we were just on the wrong side of the story.
Okay,
I
but
see
but you
now.
think in like Maleficent, where it's like, yes, she puts a curse on her, but she breaks it,
Yeah.
like even though that wasn't in the original story, you think
Yeah.
that's like a good twist and a good
Yeah.
retelling sort of thing.
I at least I enjoyed it. I am open to being wrong about that and
All
hearing
right.
other perspectives.
Well, I think I kind of want to close with just
Yeah,
a brief touching on Frozen,
sure. Let's do
because
it.
Frozen has Elsa, and Elsa is the most profitable Disney IP maybe ever, maybe since Mickey Mouse. Just incredibly popular. And she is exactly a redeemed villain with a villagin story in
Yeah,
Frozen.
yeah. She's the
So
ice queen.
she was the titular ice queen or snow queen. I can't remember what
Hmm.
the original name was. But she gets sort of an X-Men sort of like, oh, I was shunned as a child, and that's why I just want to live alone in my ice tower of isolation.
Right.
And I didn't mean to create eternal winter. It was an accident.
I just don't know how to control my powers because no one ever taught me, and I was taught that this was
Right.
a shameful secret. And oh wait,
So
but I love my sister, so we're fine now.
so I think like what that tells me is that the kind of anti-hero or proto-antagonist, like not
Hmm.
quite an pseudo-antagonist, not quite an antagonist
Yeah.
character can be profitable even if it's not a recognizable IP, in that no one really knew the Snow Queen fairy tale growing up.
Sure.
It wasn't a book that was
No,
widely read.
I don't think it was as culturally prominent as other fairy tales. I mean, it's not one that I knew growing up, but it's one that I knew about well before Frozen. So I think, that was one of the surprises of the movie for me, is like how they chose to adapt that.
Sure.
Um,
And I think
but
it has a very
yeah.
similar ending to Maleficent, where
Yeah.
yes, there's a curse on a princess, and yes, it was put there by
A
the
queen.
evil queen, whatever.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's a more familial kind of love, a more
Yeah.
platonic kind of love, true love that breaks the curse.
Sure.
So I think that is a twist that you can only do so many more times before it's no longer a twist. But for what we had, I think it's very much a signal about our times, the kind of relationships that we're interested in, that we're not really as interested in heteronormative curse breaking kisses.
Right. We've
We're
saturated the market there.
Right. We're more interested in girl power, sisterhood, or mother daughter kind of curse breaking.
Right. And I mean, I think, just to briefly touch back on Aladdin, like, the Jasmine girl power song that they added, which is like,
Right.
Jasmine already had girl power. Did you not watch the original? Like,
Yeah, but she didn't have a song, and you need an original song to try and get an Oscar.
Oscar.
So it
Yeah,
might as well
yeah,
be a
yeah.
girl power anthem.
Right.
It's just that all the songs in that movie were bad. Like even the
Yeah.
ones that were good in the original were just bad. Tom Hooper, blame Tom Hooper.
Tom.
um, yeah. Any final thoughts on Cruella?
Um, don't pay $30 for it.
Agreed. Agreed.
If you have kids, yeah, go see it. Then you can pay $30 for it. I don't know. It's fine. it's not great. It's a mess of contradictions. The girl boss stuff is weird. There's gonna be a Gaston movie where like his mom gets killed by a bookcase. Like if this trend continues.
Right.
But it could have been worse is kind of my...
It's very trope-like. I think
Yeah.
the insinuation that it's kind of written by algorithm is not wrong. There aren't many twists in the movie that I would find surprising. Like, I think the bigger twist would have been that Cruella isn't related to the Baroness.
Right.
Or the twist being that, like, you know, I don't know, that she does something to the Dalmatians other than just, you know, befriends them. I don't know. Like, there could have been other twists. There weren't any. It was just sort of a couple of heists and a couple of, you know, sort of Ocean's 11, like getting someone in trouble for murder kind of schemes.
Right. Yeah.
And then a bunch of pranks.
So many pranks. So many fashion pranks. If you like fashion,
she doesn't really do anything bad. She doesn't do anything villainous. She just does things kind of Banksy-ish.
She does steal some wallets, David. That's not nice.
But, you know, it's like any heist movie. Like, there's a difference between being a villain and being a criminal. You know?
Oh yeah,
like,
for sure.
She doesn't do anything antagonisty, is what I'm saying.
No. And so I think the movie misses out on that because that is
smooth. It doesn't have edges, but it's gonna make money. I feel somewhat confident in that.
I mean, I contributed my $30. We'll say.
I saw it in theaters. And no one else laughed when the Dalmatians kicked the woman off of a cliff, but my brother and I did very loudly.
I laughed at home.
And we'll leave it at that, I think.
Yeah. If you have any Cruella thoughts or Disney thoughts or villain thoughts, please tweet at us at Talking Tropes. We'd love to hear them.
And let us know if you want us to do a take on maybe superhero villagin stories, or, you know, on The Killing Joke or whatever. We're going to be coming back at you next week with another Standing Stanley Tucci, which is our podcast where we watch every Stanley Tucci IMDb credit in order. So let us know if you have any thoughts on that as well.
And if you yourself are a Stanley Stan, please reach out, get in touch. We want to talk.
We'll get you on the show.
Yeah.
All right. See you later, darlings.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.